Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors here at Coram Deo Church, and I'm here with Pastor Jon. What's up, Pastor Jon?
Hey, it's a good day.
It's a good day. You feeling about the same you were at the last episode you recorded?
I feel a little more lively. Like when we get going, it just kind of is life-giving. So
yes, and I feel more lively since we're not drinking whiskey like we used to be. Because usually by the second episode, you'd be like just not like too much to drink, but like you kind of just feel like you want a nap after
ready for
one
a rest.
Yeah.
I almost brought a bottle this morning because somebody gave me a bottle. Yeah. It ended up in the pulpit.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I'm saving this for a special occasion. And this last Friday was that special occasion. So I brought it. It's a 25-year Isla.
Ooh. But from who?
Who made it?
Yeah, Lafroig?
No, I've never heard of it before. It's like Isla Gold or something like that.
Cool.
I don't know. So
Isla Gold.
I sampled it.
Good.
It is like buttery smooth.
Oh, wow.
So good.
Wow.
So I almost brought it
this
morning, but then I had to bounce out of the house. And
probably
a good thing I didn't bring it.
I tell you what, whenever you say I almost brought whiskey to drink this morning, and that's
it's actually past noon right now.
I know
so.
we have a little bit long. We started a little later than we usually do.
We did. Yeah.
But I don't think that I haven't gotten anybody. I don't know. Maybe you have, but I haven't gotten anybody come to me and it's like, man, we really missed those 10-minute long introductions talking about whiskey.
No, I've heard the opposite actually. So
it's so nice that you guys don't spend the first 10 minutes talking about whiskey. Oh, okay, cool. All right. So that was fun, but just know that if you ever want to, have a dram with some buds, we're buds to do that with.
We're down. Mm-hmm. We are totally down.
But today we're kind of continuing the discussion that we started. It's kind of the flip side of Acts 6 verses 1 to 17. Is that what you preached on?
Verses 1 to 7.
7, okay, yeah. I was the one that had 17 verses, not you. That's
true.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we focused heavily on the last episode on what the apostles were protecting by instituting the diaconate, which is the ministry of deacons who were to serve tables because they couldn't be drawn away to serve tables because they had the ministry of the word.
Yeah.
And so, but what we wanted to talk about today was the importance of this ministry of deaconhood.
Yeah.
This importance of service. We talked about creeds, not deeds.
Yeah.
It's not creeds, not deeds. It's creeds and deeds. It's always been word and deed, right?
Yep.
We should never, ever, ever oppose those two things.
Right.
We should never, ever do that. So, we talked about the word. Now we're going to talk about the deed.
Talking about the deacons.
Deeds and the deacons.
The deeds and the deacons.
So, what was the complaint?
So in Acts 6, the complaint is you have a community of widows, and the Hebrew widows seem to be receiving the distribution, and the Hellenists are not so much receiving the distribution. And so the problem is, how do you address that? Yeah. And on Sunday, I was trying to push back against the temptation to read this text in light of this cultural moment where everything is explained by racism.
Sure.
Yeah.
And gender.
Race and gender. Yeah. So these are you have the Hellenists and the Hebrews, and we talk about the Hellenists were ethnic Jews, but were caught up in the exile, so they were immersed in Greek culture. Yep. And the Hebrews were ethnic Jews. Jewish culture. The interesting thing, I didn't say this on Sunday, but I was like, they're both the same ethnicity. That's how you know it wasn't racism.
Yep.
However, you have people who are not getting, for whatever reason, the distribution of the goods. And so the apostles have to figure out, okay, and what do we do? And so we talked in the last episode, they can't abandon their post to preach the word, nor can they neglect the need of the church. So the answer to that is, they're going to appoint other leaders, faithful leaders, to serve and distribute I don't know if that was a daily ration or every other day or however that looked. Other leaders were going to oversee the distribution of the goods so that no needs were overlooked. And whether or not what they have in mind is the office of deacon at this point, because I know there's a lot of people saying, don't read this as the whatever was going on. We do know by the time you get to Paul's writings to Timothy that you do have two offices in the church. You have the office of pastor elder, who is given to oversee and especially preaching and teaching. And then you have deacons, which seem to do pretty much
a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. Everything that isn't preaching, teaching.
Next moment, we have a deacon who's preaching.
Who can preach and teach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I think that there can be some danger in being too dogmatic about the difference between a deacon and the role of pastor, other than the pastor has a specific overseeing role.
Yeah.
And also, it's pretty clear that the pastor is supposed to be a man.
Yes.
And the deacons, there's a question about whether or not deacons can be male or female. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, in Acts 6, the people who are appointed to serve these tables and oversee the distribution are men of good character, Luke tells us. By the time you get to Paul writing to 1 Timothy, so the events recorded in the book of Acts are happening in the mid-30s AD.
Yeah.
When Paul is writing to Timothy, I can't remember the exact date, but I'm guessing that's early 50s.
Yes.
Maybe into somewhere in there. So you're years removed from that event in Acts. And so Paul gives this instruction in 1 Timothy chapter 3. Actually, I'm open there right now. And it talks about qualifications for overseers. Those are elders. And then in verse 8, he gets into deacons. They must be dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to much wine, not greedy, nor dishonest for gain. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. Let them also be tested first. Let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves blameless. Their wives likewise must be dignified. Now that word, their wives, right, is where a lot of the debate revolves around. When Paul gives qualifications for the elder, he says he must be the husband
of one wife.
Yep. That is not repeated.
And there's an imperative there. He must be the husband of one wife.
Yeah.
Right.
So that limits obviously the office of elder to a man.
Yep.
Because only a man can be the husband of one wife. That qualification is not applied to the office of deacon. And in verse 11, when it says their wives likewise, and then it goes to give qualifications, that word can mean a couple of things. There's a what do we call a lexical spectrum. It can mean the wives of deacons. It can mean the women.
Yes.
It can mean wives who are also deacons serving alongside their husbands.
Yep.
So it can mean any one of those things. And what's very clear, I think, from Paul in 1 Timothy is that the boundary or the line that is drawn as far as a woman's participation, that line has to do with headship.
Yep.
It has to do with oversight, and it has to do with authority in the church.
Yep.
Authority in the church is exercised through the elders.
Yep.
But not through the deacons. So
Yes.
I don't see deacons, that office being excluding women. I know that there are traditions that do.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And I think that there's actually not only New Testament reasons for that, but in terms of looking at Paul's way he verbalizes the elder versus the deacon.
Yeah.
But also you have the New Testament is building on something.
Yeah.
It's building on.
No. It's just out of the blue.
It is. There's a continuity with the Old Testament, and I would see this role of servant, right?
Yeah.
Minister, right?
Yep.
Servant, minister, serving tables as somewhat parallel with those who would minister out in the what is it called? Out the entrance of the tent of meeting.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
In the Old Testament, you had women who were actually ministers at the entrance of the tent of meeting. They weren't the role of priest.
Yeah.
The priest had to be a man.
Yeah.
It had to be man.
Why did the priest have to be a man?
Because of Adam, who was the original priest, who was given a role of overseer before woman was even made. That's what Paul anchors it in.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, but what's interesting
and
is
the priest to come
Yes, who is also
male.
Exactly. Yes.
Christ.
So, but I mean, you not only have the allowance for the women who are ministering in the gates. I think that they're basically doing deacon work.
Yeah.
What were people doing at the entrance to the meeting? Well, all those sacrifices were happening. What were they doing? They were eating. We talked about this on the barbecue. Right? They're serving tables.
Yeah.
They're serving tables in the. It's similar to what was happening around the tabernacle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that Peter and Paul take their cues from what was already established in how they order the church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they do that through the inspiration of the Spirit, who is in whom there's no variation.
Yeah. Right.
So, but you remember in Samuel, Eli's sons. What are they in trouble for? Well, they're eating the portions that don't belong to them, but they're also sleeping with the women who ministered at the entrance of the tent of meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There's their role. They were priests, and they were breaking the boundaries, and they were priests who had fallen from their role in a very perverse way.
Right.
But I think that role of they were serving. The women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting is similar to the could be that wasn't a female role only. It was also there are lots of people who served in the entrance. I mean, they could be women though.
And then you see that principle playing out in the New Testament church, in which you have the elders, the overseers. For us, is interchangeable with pastors. Yep. That's reserved to men only, biblically qualified men, and everything else is open to everybody.
Yes, and there's a lot of people who will argue there's a lot. Okay, so I didn't know we were gonna get into this discussion, but we should go there because we're here.
Okay,
and it kind of picks up on some of what we said the last thing too.
Yeah, just so you guys know, we don't map all this stuff out beforehand.
We have about 3 bullet points, and then we
can show them. This is the whole thing for 2 episodes.
Yeah. So, and then we kind of just go from there. And but these are kind of ever present, ever fresh controversies these days. So, but there in Scripture we do see prophetesses, right? We do see women who take the role of queen, right? And rule.
Yep.
Now, in those instances, it's an outlier.
Yeah.
And you could make the argument that it's an outlier because of something wrong happening.
Yeah.
And that it's an extreme situation. And I think that that's true, but it was an outlier that God provided in a lot of those instances.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't look down on it like they were overstepping their bounds. When the women step into the role of prophet or the role of queen, usually there's something broken that's happened because those offices are generally carried out by men. Okay, it's not a power. There's not some distortion of power that leads it that way.
Yeah.
It's the normal way God has instituted things and the normal roles that men and women play in the relationship of the home. That the woman is given this role of being the house despot. She's called to rule that domain. Right.
Yeah.
So there.
And every good husband is aware of that and thankful for that.
Aware, thankful, and affirms and supports by his submitting to her rule of the house.
Yeah.
Like when she says, take your shoes off, take your shoes off.
It's right.
Because you've and you are modeling for your kids the authority that you affirm in her over the house. Like there's a that's something that we miss when we think about these like submission questions, right? A man who sits on the couch and says, "Bring me my beer," and that's all. That's what he thinks submission is. It's like you are not. You're not getting it right, dude. You're a fathead, right?
Yeah.
So, so now when my wife brings me a beer, I'm like,
praise God.
So he who seeks a wife seeks a good thing.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
But there are these roles that women do play.
Yeah.
And you may even, the big argument in New Testament studies that people will use to try to say Paul is not teaching that pastors can't be women is the question of Junia.
Yeah.
Junia
right.
in Romans. I named my daughter Junia. I think it's a wonderful name. And I did it knowing the controversy, but not agreeing with these scholars.
Yeah.
The debate is people saying that, and this is Scott McKnight and all these egalitarians are saying that Junia is being called an apostle. And again, even if you agree with that, okay, which there's a debate, and I think there's actually not a bad reason to say that she belongs to a category of something called apostles, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
Now, even if you agree with that,
would you say the like capital A, lowercase a apostle? You'd make that distinction there?
This is what I would say. An apostle in the New Testament was somebody who had a specific witness of the resurrected Lord, and thus had a specific call to say, I witnessed the resurrected Lord.
Yeah.
And there are only a handful of people who can say that.
Yeah.
And so when Paul makes his argument that he was an apostle born late, right? He could only say that because he witnessed the resurrected Lord on the Damascus Road.
Yeah.
So there is I don't know if you guys can hear that. It's like raining, right?
I think it's like hail.
Whatever it is,
hail.
it is loud. So
it sounds wonderful.
I love it, yeah. But it's funny, you don't know if you can hear it on the audio or not.
We really can hear these things, I promise.
But if you did think that Junia is a woman, which some people don't even think that, they think that Junius could be a male name. I think that there are people who have argued pretty well that it's not the case.
Yeah.
If you think that, then you have to answer the question also, what is an apostle? And if you say apostle is a very select group of people who have witnessed the resurrected Lord, that's not the same thing as saying she was a pastor.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing as saying that she had a role of overseer.
Yeah.
Like people make that leap.
Well, would you say that if Junia is in fact a female, that she's an apostle in the same sense that Peter, John, or Paul are an apostle?
I think that you could make the claim that she was an apostle in that she could witness to and probably had she's the kind of person that would have a conversation with Luke to give him the authoritative word on what happened.
Because she saw it.
She's the eyewitness.
Yeah.
So, in terms of Peter, Paul, and John, they're also, I think, playing a role of witness, but Peter also plays, I think that those guys are also playing a role of witness. They're playing overseer role.
There's a clear authority. Leadership authoritative.
There's authority.
Role,
but I don't think that belongs to the category, like in terms of exercising authority over the church. It doesn't belong to the category in the same way. I think that that distinction is important. So that's where it gets kind of like you really have to, in order to affirm Junia as being an example of female pastor, you have to also say Paul's wrong.
Yeah, and that's where, like, when I get into these discussions with guys, and pastors get in discussions over these things all the time. It's like if you're gonna say Junia was an apostle in the same sense that Peter and Paul were an apostle, and therefore we should have male pastors, you're taking Junia, which is debated, was it a male or a female, and you have to completely punt what is very clear when Paul writes to Timothy about church leadership, right?
Yes.
And it's like, you should never take what's clear and subjugate it to that which is not clear. It should always be the other way around. Well, who was Junia? What was the role? Well, what do we know about Paul's clear instruction to elders and overseers in the church? That's very clear.
Yes.
And so whatever role Junia is playing, or whoever Junia is, it's not going to be inconsistent with that.
Yes, and I think that...
So the law of non-contradiction?
Yes, and I think that if you have questions about this, or if you're wrestling with this, or you've heard somebody like a Scott McKnight argue for Junia's being a reason for why there can be female pastors, I would encourage you to read James Jordan's 2-part
Liturgical
series,
Man,
Liturgical Man, and Liturgical Woman. It's really helpful.
Good.
Really helpful, and it gets into a lot. Like he's not gonna ignore the cases like the ministers in the tabernacle or these different roles that women play. He really helps frame the whole discussion biblically. And so I would encourage.
And he
you to
goes
go there.
back to the creation of Adam first and Eve, and their liturgical roles, and even the distinction between male and female as having a liturgical reality even before a what does he say, a biological or a sexual?
Yes, exactly.
It's pretty interesting.
But I'll just add one closing thing on the Junia.
Because we got to get back to the widows.
Yeah, we got to get back to widows. And so, but one closing thing would be this. Okay, I think Richard Bach makes a pretty good case that Junia is actually Joanna. Okay, and Joanna was one of the women who witnessed Jesus witnessed the empty tomb.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
That's why there's this. He makes this connection that she was a witness to the actual resurrection. Went to the tomb; it was empty. Okay,
Yeah.
and she had that unique witness that she probably told someone like Luke. So, and the reason for that is Bauckham has done extensive study on first century names and how a lot of Joanna is a Hebrew name.
Okay.
And a lot of times people, because they lived in this situation where there are Hellenists,
Yeah.
there's a Hellenized culture.
Yes.
You would have your Hebrew name, but you would also often have a Greek name.
A Greek name, yeah.
Okay, so for instance, Matthew means the exact same thing that Nathaniel means. Nathaniel is a Hebrew name. El is the word for God. Nathaniel.
Yeah.
It's like lover of God or something like that.
Yeah.
And Matteo
Yeah.
is lover of God, but Greek.
Yeah.
So there's some lists of the disciples where you have a Nathaniel but not a Matthew. And he's like, I'm pretty sure that's the same person.
Yeah.
So
right.
Junia and Joanna, possibly same person. So okay.
So back to widows.
Widows.
Okay, so the issue is there are widows, and the assumption is that they are a priority.
Yes.
Right? Because the solution isn't to just overlook it or neglect it
Yes.
or whatever. So in the early church, and it's clear not just from Acts 6, but also when Paul is actually writing to Timothy about the care of widows, that widows are to be cared for and are to be a priority. In fact, if you look at 1 Timothy 5, where Paul talks about the care of widows, it's really interesting that in chapter 5, he talks about widows, and then he also talks about elders being paid. And it's like, those are the financial priorities in that church, it seems, as Paul's laying them out. But Paul doesn't say, give every widow distribution. He
delineates who
delineates.
should be enrolled in the distribution and who should not.
Not all of them should.
Yes.
Some of them should. So let's get into what are some of those distinctions and why.
Yeah.
Why are they?
I think he makes a distinction about younger widows versus elder widows.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about why that is?
Well, the position of a widow was that if you lost your husband, then you lost your provider.
Exactly.
You didn't own property.
Yep.
How do you have income?
Yeah. You might have had maybe you would have had some property, but you wouldn't have had the person who would have been the manager of the external work of that property. You probably played a big part in managing it, but you lost a whole half of the whole workforce.
Right.
Right. Yes.
Right. So
and your protector.
When you're an older widow and that happens, then you really have no other options.
Yes.
However, younger widows do have options.
Yes.
They have the option of marrying again.
Yes. This feels so controversial to talk about.
I know.
To say that in Paul's understanding of the norms, the goal would be a man and a female married together, and that provides a normative financial stability, because you have a provider, a man whose takes responsibility to provide and initiative, and he has to use his God-given ambition to do that, and not be idle, not be lazy. And that is the safety and the provision for the woman who has so much more to do as well, and is his helper. And so there's a kind of when discussing widows, yes, if you're young and you're a widow, you have more likelihood to be able to remarry.
Right.
So and there's a kind of conservation of resources being administered here too. The need for the older widows, because they don't have the opportunity to remarry, is heavier. And so
and I think there's like a likeliness there, right?
Yes.
Because he's not saying if you're an older widow, you can't get remarried. But it's just typically an older widow is not going to get. Now, I think we probably know older women who have been widowed who have gotten remarried. That's great. But the likelihood of that is less if you're older, and is a greater opportunity if you're younger. But even with the widows, he doesn't just say as long as you're older, you're in. There's other
what does he say?
Well, the first thing he says is that if there's a widow in your church, right, the family, that would be the
Yes.
sons and daughters.
The immediate family, yes.
The immediate family bears the primary responsibility for her provision. And he says this, he uses really hard language. But if in verse 8, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse
than an
unbeliever.
Yeah.
So the first line of defense for the widow is her family. Mm-hmm. The ones who she has given life to should return the favor and give life to her. Mm-hmm. And that can be bringing her into a household. That can be accepting financial responsibility for her. But that is the first line.
That's consistent
of
with the fifth commandment.
Yeah.
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 Yes.
Yeah. Honor your mother and your father.
Yep.
So when and that goes either way. Like if you have, if dad is older and not able to care for himself, then a family should rally if needed. And if mom is older and can't care for herself, then the family should rally around if needed as well. But I love how Paul's like, you're not on the list.
Yeah.
Don't let your laziness, siblings, put mom on the list of widows for the church and become a financial burden to the church.
Don't let the siblings and the children be the reason for her being on the list.
Absolutely.
It's your responsibility. If you, I'd say the direction you're in particular is if you're members of Christ, if you're a Christian, you're duty bound there. And then on the flip side, when he talks to the younger widows, he again the situation is sad. This younger widow has lost her husband.
Yeah.
It could, and there's probably instances also where it's not just losing your husband; it's you're abandoned by your husband, right?
Yeah.
There's two ways to become a widow,
right? For sure.
But he says that. Besides that, if they don't remarry, right? Refuse to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry. So incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips, busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have the younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander.
Yeah.
So that's just culturally can he say that?
Yeah.
Right.
And essentially what he's saying is if you're a younger widow, that's not your free ticket.
Yes, exactly. That's basically what he's saying. He's basically saying he does not want the generosity of the church to turn into a ticket for idleness.
Yes.
100%. Which is interesting on its own front.
Yeah.
To say that there is a generosity flowing out of the church, but it's a protected generosity.
Yes.
It's a generosity that is...
It's a prioritized
because
generosity.
There's so I just recorded a Bible Thoughts on the Gleaning Laws.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay? God is so wise. Okay? He is so wise in how he sets up, how he wants his people to care for the poor, the disadvantaged, the impoverished. He says those who have property, don't completely reap your harvest.
Right.
Leave it for the poor, which would be the widows and the sojourners.
Yeah.
Do you know what gleaning is? It's a job.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
Right.
If you've ever been on a farm during harvest, it's hard work.
Yeah.
Okay. The people whose hands who harvest,
they're calloused.
They're calloused.
Yep.
They
Rough.
are hard work. They're sweaty individuals covered in dirt. Okay.
Yeah.
And not only that, gleaning wasn't just like you weren't harvesting the easy stuff.
Yeah.
It was everything left.
It was the hard stuff.
It was the stuff lower to the ground.
Yeah.
It was the stuff higher up in the tree. It was the stuff on the side of the cliff that nobody
just
wanted
out
to
of
get.
reach.
Exactly.
I can't get it with my ladder.
It was the things left over. So, and we read about Ruth. Ruth works all day.
Yeah, gleaning.
Up until the evening.
And I think we've talked about this on Sundays quite a bit. Yeah. Like I come back to that verse in Deuteronomy where you have that gleaning law. And when you pointed that out to me, I was like, yeah, it's really easy to read that verse and just think like you almost think like the farmers are harvesting everything and then you leave this bucket out,
or you send it to a central government to distribute.
Yeah, sure. But that's not at all what is happening. It was work.
Yeah.
and it was labor, and then there was a fruit of that labor. There was a reward of that labor. And what that does is it is protecting, it's not just protecting the landowner, it's really protecting the people from being caught into this laziness, idleness, and it's slavery.
It is. Yes, exactly. So that's the thing. That's the point I kind of landed on. I was like, there's a gracious call to the landowners. Mm-hmm. It's don't let your wealth be a stumbling block. Yeah. Learn through the act of generosity and not maximizing your profits. Learn through that you are completely dependent upon God. Yeah. Everything that you have is given to you by Him, by His gracious hand.
Right. Thus, remember you were slaves in Egypt. That's what God says. Like, remember your story.
Yes. Thus, imitate Him.
Yeah.
Imitate His generosity. And then the message to the poor is, don't envy the rich.
Yeah.
And don't think you can get by with idleness. I want to bring you into the dignity of hard work. Like, He wants to. And that's grace.
Yes.
And that's
because work is a glorious thing.
Yes. And I think we have a negative view of hard work.
Yeah.
We have a negative view of getting your hands dirty.
Yeah.
And it's because we think that work is below us, when actually we were made for work.
Yeah.
Toil is a curse upon our work, but the work itself is good.
Yeah. Before there was ever sin, in the garden, God gives Adam a task, right?
Yes.
You're the cultural mandate. You're supposed to multiply. You're supposed to subdue.
Yes.
You're supposed to express dominion.
It's so much work, He needs a helper.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Yes.
Right? And what kind of work was it? It was garden work.
Yes.
Like farmers.
Yes.
That's a lot of work. That's hard work.
Yes.
That's your calloused hands. Your hands are in the dirt.
Yep.
That existed before the fall. And like what you said, what happens after the fall is not that now Adam has work. It's that the earth is pushing back on Adam, almost as a picture of Adam pushing back on God.
Yes.
Right?
It's like he's getting squeezed from both.
Yeah.
So the fourth commandment about Sabbath, we often forget.
Yeah.
The fourth commandment has 2 parts.
Yeah. Work 6 days.
You must do your labor 6 days a week and then rest.
Yes.
Keep the Sabbath day as holy. That's a 2-part commandment.
Yeah.
You have the command to work,
Yep.
and you have the command to rest.
Yeah.
And both of those things are supposed to be freeing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So what you see here in Paul's letter is consistent towards the widows, right? And it's also and the call to deacons is consistent too. You have basically this call to serve the table, serve these impoverished people, right? The people who are at higher risk and more vulnerable,
genuinely impoverished,
impoverished, and it's similar to the Gleaning Laws. Mimic your Father who is generous, who loves and cares for the widows.
Yeah.
But then also to the widows who are able to work, he says, because some widows are not able to work.
Right.
He says,
for sure.
Paul lays out 60 years old as an age that he says if they're under 60. If they're under 60, what?
They can remarry.
They can remarry, apparently. So that is helpful to think about his call to unmarried widows as a gracious call, to bring them, to not let them be stuffed with themselves, but to give them this vocation that God calls them into as a gracious thing.
Yeah. And there's we have to close this, but while you're talking about this, I'm hearing this in my head. Right? I'm like, oh, we got to go here. So there is when you are living off of the generosity of other people, it is slavery.
Yes.
Because you're stuck to it.
Yeah.
You have no freedom. You have no choice. Yeah. You can't do your own thing. You become a slave. You become dependent.
Yeah. You see this in a lot of political situations the way that our state wants to do welfare, where people will think, well, I don't want to get that raise because I'll actually have to be in a different tax bracket, and I'm better off. It's harder work, so I'm better off not getting there.
But like right now in COVID, where the government has incentivized not going to work, like you see people are trying to hire and they can't hire because people would rather get their benefits from free instead of go to work. And it's like they're slaves.
Yes.
And it controls them.
Yes. And they don't have a high view of they're being kept from a high view of work.
Yes. And And not only are they being kept from a high view of work, they're being kept from a high view of their own dignity.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yep,
They
yep.
are being dehumanized.
Yes.
And so work is a gift.
Yep.
And being able to sustain yourself is a gift, and to enjoy the fruit of your labors
Yes.
is a gift. And that's something that right now people are being robbed of. It's part of why socialism is so evil.
Yeah.
Because it robs people of the dignity of work.
I think that socialism, and many of its manifestations, are often, if you get down to it, they end up being did God really say about the image of being made in the image of God?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Did God really say that there's such a thing as male and female? That's an area where socialism is, social Marxism is like emphasizing the gender roles and how that's destructive.
Yep.
Man, we could keep going on this subject,
Yeah.
but like there's just a lot of, and then says work's bad, says hard work is oppressive,
Yeah.
and so we need to figure out a way to get the people who have wealth to spread that wealth so that there's not as much work. But to be honest, like, obviously, wealth doesn't cause people to be happy.
No.
Have you heard much about Bill Gates lately?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So let's just end on this, okay? I love Paul's word in 2 Thessalonians, okay? He is addressing the same thing, okay? And so just emphasize, there's a call to servitude that we should affirm, and yet it's not a call to servitude that is also discounts the value of work, okay?
Yeah.
So I want to affirm that because I'm going to talk about work again, even though we started talking about servitude. But Paul says, we hear there are some among you who walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Now such persons we command and encourage, okay? Command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. And I read that, I was struck by the pastoral tone of, we hear that there's some of you that just hate working and are just trying to live off of other people. And he says, we command and encourage you in the Lord Jesus Christ. Do your work quietly and earn your own living. He's calling them in the Lord Jesus Christ and encouraging them to enjoy the fruits of their own labor.
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes says, it's a joy that God has given man to enjoy the fruits of his labor.
Yes.
So anyways, man, that one got all over the place.
Can I say one more thing? Because we were talking about deacons, right?
Yeah.
Is that
please end on this.
Deacons are a huge blessing to the life of the church. I tried to
necessary
lean into this a little bit on Sunday, but it's like when we gather together, it's like there are so many people that have served and are actively serving and able for this to happen and for the ministry of the church to go on. Many of those are incredibly wonderfully gifted, bright women, and it is a huge blessing to our church, even on our church staff. It's like there are women that have incredible gifts, and like when we have our staff meetings, we'll talk about like we love to see them exercise their gifts because it's life-giving to us. So we are super grateful for everybody who serves here, and for
Nettie and Krista. We'll just say it.
Yeah,
Nettie and Krista.
say the name. Nettie
and Peggy.
Yeah, while we're talking about deacons, there's actually a gal who is preparing stuff for this week. She's here every single Tuesday.
Lynn's too.
Yeah, Lindsay. You've got Rhiannon doing scheduling and organizing. I mean, there's you could just go on and on and on, and it is a massive blessing to our church. We could not survive without it.
Yeah, the financial committee guys too. So there's tons, and it's evidence.
And benevolence.
Yes.
Like anytime somebody has a need, you've got a mortgage payment, a rent payment you can't get, you have a prescription, you have a doctor's bill, you have whatever.
Yes.
It's like we have a whole process and team that will say, this is a real need. We want to help you out.
Yes. And I know based on your and my schedule, if that was on us, it would hinder.
It wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen.
It would hinder the preaching of the word.
Absolutely.
And the teaching. So, we should be thankful. And we should also be, that door open, calling to serve is always open because there's always more to do.
Absolutely.
There's don't wait for someone to carve out something cut just for you. You might actually have something you want to do, and that's the best way to find out what it is.
Absolutely.
So,
Agreed.
Cool. Right on.
All right.
Ready?
Yeah.
Well, until next time, everybody, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.
Take care.